welcome. Welcome, everyone, to She Became Visible. I am Renee Steelman, your host for the show. The focus of She Became Visible is to highlight women of all ages who have stood up and declared themselves visible, worthwhile, and declared their purpose on earth through their own role descriptions and not through someone else's. And I can't think of anyone that fulfills that description better than my guest today. So let me give you a little bit of background on Chandler. We moved to Vancouver, Washington in 2007, which, if any of you are familiar with the Pacific Northwest, the Columbia River separates Oregon from Washington. And one of the beautiful things about the state of Oregon, and I can't think of a lot besides their natural beauty, but other than that, is the fact that they don't have a sales tax, right? One of the nice things about the state of Washington is they don't have a property tax. So Vancouver, Washington is literally on the Columbia River and is truly the bedroom community for people who live in the Portland vicinity, somewhere around some of the other areas that outlie Portland. So for a long time, we lived in Oregon or we lived in Vancouver, and then my husband worked in Oregon. So what people do is they cross the bridge, they shop in Oregon to avoid the sales tax, and then they live in Washington state to avoid the high property taxes, which meant that housing was cheaper in Washington than it was in Oregon. So when we bought our very first little home in 1976, it was about $30,000 less to live in Washington state. Now, I think that has kind of evened out, and I don't think there's that much of a discrepancy any longer. But we lived in Vancouver, Washington for a while, and then we ended up moving back to Oregon. We spent most of our marriage and raising our children in the state of Oregon. But in 2007, we moved back to Washington state in Vancouver. And the ward that we belonged to, the Roberson family, was in our ward. And we just clicked with Chandler's mom and dad. And there were 2 or 3 other couples that we just became a little gang. And we hung out together and we date nighted together. And I was immediately put into the Young Women's Program. I was teaching the Beehives, which, if any of you are listening and you're not members of the church, that's the 12-year-old little girls that have just come into the program. And then I think at the time, Chandler will have to correct me. Chandler was, I think, a my maid at that time. So she was in the class right above me. So I didn't actually work with her one-on-one, but I observed her because there were a lot of group activities for all of the women ages 12 to 18 that were in what they call the Young Women Program. And I was also close friends with her best friend's mom and dad. And so I knew the friends of Chandler. And that's your book, Chandler. That's the name of your next book, Friends of Chandler. But anyway, so I have a little bit of a background, but because I wasn't actually teaching Chandler, and she was a couple years older than the kids that I was working with, I kind of watched her from afar. And then we ended up moving to a different ward after Chandler became a young adult. So she'll have to clarify that for me. But anyway, I've watched her, and I watched her Mormon stories. I'm so impressed with this young woman's vulnerability and her bravery. And I want to start out by just describing a little bit about how we as women have been socialized, are still a little bit socialized, but it's actually getting better. There's a wonderful book out there, if any of you are familiar with Kristen Neff, Dr. Kristen Neff. Her book, Fierce Self-Compassion, is a wonderful book. And when she talks about standing strong, she says, as women, we've unconsciously internalized the message from our culture that we are the weaker sex, helpless maidens who need a big, strong man to save us. For too long, we've been taught to value dependence over independence, to be attractive and sexy, not as a way of expressing ourselves, but as a means to attract a man who can protect us. We don't need men to protect us. We need to protect ourselves. Women are strong. We handle the pain of childbearing, we hold families together, and skillfully navigate interpersonal conflict and adversity. But until we learn how to stand up for ourselves with the same fierce energy we use to care for others, our ability to take on the world's big challenges will remain limited. And I think there are so many beautiful quotes out there from just amazing, strong women who I hold up as mentors, prophetesses, just teachers. And there are so many words of wisdom. And one of the things that Dr. Neff points out is that we need to draw boundaries. And I think Chandler's stories are going to show how she drew her boundaries. Dr. Neff says, fierce protective energy empowers us to draw clear boundaries and say no. Women are socialized to be giving and accommodating, and many of us believe that this is what gives us value, that people won't like us if we say no. So let me bring Chandler on right now, and she's going to tell you a few of her stories of when she said no. Okay. There she is.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm so pleased to have you on here. And you'll have to go back and correct some of my timeline. Where were you age-wise in 2007, 2008? How old would you have been?
Good question. 2007, 2008.
I mean, I guess
So
let's
I
see,
remember.
12 and 13 is beehives, 14, 15 is
Mhm.
my maids. Would you have been a my maid?
So
Or
I
were you?
think I would have been, yeah, I think I would have been a My Maid by
Okay,
that point. Yeah.
okay. And our children attended, no, our children were grown by the time we moved to Vancouver. So you were at a high school. You were very
Mhm.
active in your high school. Talk a little bit about that. You were not a little shrinking flower over in the corner. You had a great high school life, right?
Yeah, I loved high school, honestly. I mean, I did dance team pretty much the entire time. And I think that was the most like sports thing that I was active in. But I was pretty good friends with pretty much everyone in my grade. I I'm trying to think. I mean, I did a dance thing. So there was a dance class there that was different from dance team, and I taught with that class with some of the teachers that did that as well. So that was really fun. And then I also did dance outside of my high school, so it was just a lot of dance, but that was very involved for high school. There was a lot of that.
Right. So dance was your sport, and
Mhm.
it allowed you to get involved in all kinds of different high school activities, right?
Yep.
So if you know you're there's representing the school in competition, state competition.
Mhm.
There's representing the dance club at different other sporting events, right? Were you guys
Yep.
involved with football games, basketball games, and things like that?
Yep. Yep. All the
So yeah,
sports.
yeah. So it got you, like you said, your friendship group was outside of just the dance group because you served and interacted with all of the other kids, whatever else was going on at the high school. And so
Yep.
that's what I remembered. I just remembered how active you were and how happy you were. What would you say your experience was like in Young Women's?
I honestly, at the time, I think especially, I would have just said I loved it. It was the best, like, I looked forward to it, because a lot of my friends were there, so I think
Right.
that's what I looked forward to, and I believed in it at the time, so I thought, "I'm doing a good thing." So, definitely had a lot of positive feelings about it at the time. Obviously, looking back, I see it a little bit differently. I think there was a lot I was experiencing that I didn't have the words to express.
Mm.
I remember there being a lot of lessons that, depending on what it was about, I remember we had a really big group lesson about same sex marriage. And I remember at
Oh,
the time, like really inside feeling a certain way about it, but not wanting to be the one that got up or left or something, and then having a lot of guilt about that later on. So I think I really enjoyed the friendships that were there and I don't know, I felt like I was doing something good. So I enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it at the time.
now,
But it was
did you work on your medallion?
so I did work on the medallion, but I had this weird thing where I didn't I didn't want to do it just because it was expected of me and like just to check something off and have a party. So I finished all of the things that I was supposed to do like on my own time and did it personally, but never wanted recognition for it. So I never officially got it, but it was like a private thing for me, which is so ridiculous now. But
Isn't that
I had weird
amazing?
feelings about it.
Isn't that amazing? I look back now and I see where my perfectionism got in the way of so many things because I was and I still am, and it's a critical trait that I'm trying to work on. I was such a black and white person that when my girls
Mhm.
were going through the program, um, I said, no, you can't count the charitable service work that you're doing through cheerleading. You can't count that towards the hours
Yep.
for your medallion. You have to do medallion charity service, and then whatever you're doing with your cheerleading squad, that doesn't count. And they had wonderful young women leaders, and the young women leaders would go, it counts. You can count that, you know.
Mhm.
But I was such a black and white person that, like you said, I was like, this, I'm reading it. It says you have to do this, this, and this. And I felt like that meant solo, you have to do this group stuff. No, no, no. That's not an individual medallion. That's a group medallion. And that's what kept my boys from even being involved in the scouting program because I saw these
Mm.
mothers that were doing the Eagle Project for their kids, basically.
Yep.
And then these kids were getting eagles. And I was like, they didn't do that. Their mom did that. So
Yes.
I look back now and I think, oh, you were just so critical and so, you know, down to this stupid black and white perfectionism that you prevented even your kids from enjoying, you know, some of the stuff. And so it's like, I get exactly where you're coming from for that, you know, that's
And
amazing.
it can be really hard because even though I would say I did a lot of things that were really right, it's hard not to get wrapped up in doing it like exactly as it is, especially when you believe it's for a higher purpose. You think
Yeah.
like exactness is key. So I totally get that too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And also there's that suffering part, right? Where you have to suffer and you have to
Yes.
like be exhausted for it to count, you know. And I mean,
Yeah.
I just
Yes.
remember you guys, I remember you and one of your best friends coming to Mutual on Wednesday evening, dragging your homework with you. And you're sitting over in the corner trying to do your homework while we're making gingerbread houses out of graham crackers. And I just remember thinking, okay, if this activity is not of more value than graham crackers, these poor kids are busy. And I had so
Right.
much compassion. And I remember trying to say, look, every activity has to have a value more than just getting everybody together. Otherwise, let's just get together for
Yeah.
pizza on Friday night. And
Yeah.
so it's amazing how these, you know, and it kind of correlates. We're making gingerbread houses. The guys are playing basketball. And for some reason that all counted, but gingerbread
Yes.
houses didn't count. I don't know how that worked out, but anyway.
Always was a pet peeve of mine too.
Yeah, yeah. So
Uh,
one of the things that I loved about your Mormon stories, which you is that you explained that your mom came from a Catholic background, your dad came from a more Methodist background, which gave your family a little bit more freedom to not maybe be one of these fundamental families that had these hardcore rules, and you were allowed to kind of be you. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I wanna clarify, after the Mormon stories, I talked to my mom and she was like, "I went to Catholic school, but I wasn't technically raised Catholic," and so there was, like, this
Oh,
weird disconnect of me as a kid always
okay.
thinking hearing these stories and being like, "You're I swear" so anyways, so I will
Yeah.
clarify, she was involved with Catholic school, but not necessarily the religion, but she did try out a lot of religions, so I think it's kinda the same, feel, but honestly, I think it was, going back to your original question, I think it was really healthy that they were both of different beliefs when they joined the church or when my dad became active in the church because they didn't have years and years of tradition or family members that were kind of looking in and expecting us to be a certain way. So I think they cared a bit more about who we were as children specifically instead of necessarily like what is our family going to think because I think a lot of people with heavy Mormon families that becomes like a whole thing. So I just think that we were able to have more freedom in how we were raised. And there wasn't quite, I mean, there were still things, obviously, because we were in the church, but it was
Right.
a lot healthier than a lot of my friends' families, for sure.
Right, right, exactly. And I think that's why, again, why I connected with your family because I basically grew up Methodist and
Hmm.
I was 12 when my parents joined the church. And so they embraced the church, but they also fell back on their own childhoods. And so there were a lot of things, and I don't know if it's really church related or religious related as much as it was in their case narcissistically related, but there just wasn't a lot. I mean, we tried family home evening, but the bottom line was I had one little brother who was 8 years younger than I was. And my older brother who joined the church at the time, he was 15, I was 12. A year later, he went to live with my biological dad. For my my mom to try to have family home evening with a 16-year-old and an 8-year-old is like, this isn't working. This
Rough.
isn't
Yeah.
working. And so I didn't have that. My seminary was very kind of up and down because when we lived in Illinois, I had to drive 45 minutes to get to the church every morning, or they tried having it in the basement of our home at one point. So I did it more for social reasons than, religious reasons. And so that wasn't, it just wasn't the same as if you'd been raised in the bubble where
Yeah.
so many of the church's auxiliaries are just ingrained in every little cell of your life. So I think
Yes.
I connected with your family for that same reason is, your parents were like, hey, we're doing our best. And these guys are all individual people and we're going to try to teach them core values. And here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that they had experiences, growing up without the church. So I think they knew kids will be kids and like they'll survive these things. And it's probably better that they have these experiences where they learn on their own than us just forcing them to make decisions. So I think it was much healthier.
Yes, exactly. So what I got out of your Mormon stories was a lot of shame, not necessarily brought on by other people directly. Like no one pointed their finger and said, shame on you, Chandler. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're not living up to our family's expectations. Nobody did that. But it
Yeah.
was a subconscious feeling that you took on that took you after you graduated from high school, took you to your college experience. So talk a little bit about that,
Mhm.
where you think that came from.
Yeah, honestly, I think it started out pretty young for me. I mean, I think being a middle child is such a specific, unique experience. I think that I always just wanted to be good because as kids, my younger brother had a lot more needs and my older sister had a bit more needs. She was just a bit louder and more rambunctious. So I already from just the get-go was proud of being just the good kid that wasn't as much work for my parents. And
Yeah.
so doing good was an instant positive in my life. And so then you think about going to church as a young kid, and it just kind of starts and just like, oh, Jesus died for you, and you know, he died for your sins. So every time you're sinning, you're making him hurt more. And I remember that just impressed me so much as a kid of just like, why I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And I told this story on Mormon Stories, and it's such a silly thing, but it just like instantly impressed me as a kid that like this is all very real. Was we were visiting my mom's family in Ohio, and there was this gumball machine that you needed to have like a penny or a coin to use. And my aunt or someone had a big jar of just pennies in their trailer. So I was like, everyone was taking them, and I was like, I'm going to take one too. And got my gumball, didn't think twice about it. And then the next week in church, the lesson in primary was about stealing. And one of the phrases they used was stealing is stealing, even a penny. And I, like, my little primary brain was just so overwhelmed by that. I was like, okay, this is all real, like 100%. So I was locked in, I think, at a very young age. And because of that, I think you're just very naive. You believe what everyone tells you. So as I got older and older, that's a pattern that just kind of continued. And it's like, it snowballs as you get older because more is added on. There's more expected of you. There's, sexual purity stuff that's added on to you. There's, not partying, not doing all the things. There's a very specific path for you, and anything outside of that is bad. And
Yeah.
so being someone too, looking back now, I know that I've had OCD my entire life. You combine that with church stuff as well, and it
Okay.
is really brutal. It's you get
Exactly.
very, fixated on things and you're always making sure you're doing the right thing. And I remember being in high school having nightmares that I had smoked for the first time or that I had drank alcohol or whatever, you name it. And I would wake up just like in a panic attack anxiety because I thought I had really done the thing. And things like that scared me so much. I was just so obsessed with being good. I just wanted to be good for the people around me. I wanted to be an example to the people around me. And for Jesus, like that was God and Jesus was like the big thing. And so, and I think it felt good because I fit the aesthetic and the look of like the good Mormon girl. I was blonde,
Yeah.
I white, I have all these characteristics that's the Mormon girl. And so I think it felt good going to a place from, again, being the middle child who was very quiet and just tried to lay low, and then going to a place where I got a lot of attention for being good. And
Mhm.
so it just continued on and on. And you can imagine all the experiences, and I talked about some of it on Mormon Stories, but it followed me in every single thing that I did, and guilt just always followed me. And then again, going out to college and being in such a different world than I was used to out in the Pacific Northwest. It's a very different vibe than Rexburg, Idaho. And I go here thinking I'm this great, well behaved, good girl. And I was, but going there where the bar is just so much higher. And I was like, wow, I really have to step it up and like ramp it up in order to be good. So it's interesting journey.
That's amazing. I didn't realize, I just assumed that all of the church schools basically had, like the church itself, there's headquarters, right? You get a handbook from headquarters. We watch General Conference from headquarters. I assumed that
Mm-hmm.
all of the schools that were owned by the church, there was a directive that came from headquarters and that they were all the same. It's just that one was in Idaho,
Mm,
one was in Hawaii, one was in Provo. And so we went to an orientation for our son when he was entering into BYU Provo, and they were talking about the different standards at Rexburg. And I remember going, "What are you talking about? What do you mean different standards?" And this one mother was just irate because she had just bought her daughter all of these clothes to take to college, and they got
oh
there and found
no.
out that capris were not allowed. And I
Yes.
was like,
Mm-hmm.
"What are you talking about?" And so that's when I first found out that, I mean, to like, you went to the Orthodox fundamental hardcore BYU. So,
Yeah.
I mean, were you the same way? Were you like, what? I've tried not to, I've tried to wear modest clothing my whole life, but now I have to wear a burqa,
Yeah.
practically. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
what? Now, was
Yeah.
Bednar there when you were there? Who was
No, he
the,
wasn't. It was
okay.
trying to think of his name now, and I should know this off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Clark.
who cares?
It was
Okay.
President Clark. Hmm.
Okay. I can't imagine going to school with Bednar anywhere near that school. I mean, that would
Oh
have
my
been like, I'm
gosh.
surprised they didn't have on Nazi uniforms. I mean, it was just amazing.
Honestly.
But
Yeah.
so talk a little bit about, now, did you meet your first husband at BYU Idaho?
Surprisingly, no. I actually met him once I moved to Utah. So
Oh.
I didn't meet either of them out there, which is kind of shocking. But
Yeah.
the bar for like meeting men and dating in Rexburg, Idaho was pretty awful.
No.
It
Tell
was
us
it was
about that.
awful.
Like
I
there
just
was a
had so
list.
many oh, there was just so many weird like I it was so I went on dates regularly with a few different guys who like one of their conversation points was I would need to marry someone who, if polygamy was reintroduced, would be like okay with it. And I remember being like,
What?
mm-hmm,
What? Did that come
yeah,
up in family
yeah,
home evening? How was that
yeah.
discussed?
I did. It was just like casually on dates. Like I remember being on an ice cream date with a guy when we this came up, and it was just like, okay. And the amount of guys that tell you they know they're going to marry you on your first
Oh,
date is just very bizarre. I mean, I went out with a certain guy that I remember being like, I've always felt like I'm supposed to do something really important in my life. I just don't know what it is yet. And he was like, it's being a mom,
of
and
course.
they
Yeah.
think that's such a compliment. And I remember dating this one guy, and we were reading a passage from a talk or something, and in the talk it says, I think it's Uchtdorf, but maybe Christopherson, they say like, if the perfect person existed, like why would they be interested in you? So like you need to lower your standards. The perfect person
Oh.
doesn't exist. And he basically was like, basically this guy that I was saying was like I feel like I'm pretty close to perfect, and like that's not true, like whatever. And he basically just like was like, I think I'm perfect, and like women are lucky to be with me. And I was just okay. Like it
And
was just this
he was lowering
arrogant.
his standards to be with you. It's like, I just want you to
Yes,
know
yeah,
that I'm willing to follow President Uchtdorf
yes,
and lower my standards because, you kind of need a
yes.
date. Yeah.
Yes, it was very bizarre, and the same guy I remember, he had like a sit down conversation with me like maybe a couple weeks into seeing each other, and he was like, I'm really concerned about if you ever met my family because your Facebook pictures are very inappropriate. And it was literally me in a tankini that covered my entire body basically with maybe like this much of midriff. And I was with my friends in the picture, and he was like, my mom would just be so upset if she
Oh,
saw these pictures. And I think you need to really think about like these decisions. And what's crazy is like in my head, I was so angry when he said it. Like I was like, how dare he say this? And then after he left, I was like, he's right. Like I need to do better. And so I remember changing the pictures. And so I
oh,
think that's like was a really bad turning point in my experience too, with like Mormonism and dating, and just not honoring my own needs and myself, because I just would always, I think my problem that I was too open to criticism. Like I wanted to be so humble that I was always assuming everyone knows more than me. I'm always going to be wrong. And so when someone would tell me something, especially a boy, a man, a priesthood holder, I would just have to say like, oh, well, they have more authority than me. They know more than me. I need to be better about this. And so I think it was definitely a turning point in my experience.
wow. That,
Yeah.
I think that's so amazing. When President Oakes just gave one of his infamous talks, all of his talks are infamous in a negative way. But
Yeah.
how Jesus did not say that he wanted diversity in this church. He wants us all to be one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting to me that we are so individual. Like I was able for some reason to look at, like, I remember at 16, we're still living in Illinois, and there was this really cute guy. I wish I could remember his name. And I kind of wanted to date him, but he just came right out and told me that he couldn't date me because I dyed my hair. And his mother said, you don't want to date her. She dyed her hair. And I was like, okay,
Oh.
all right, well,
Mm-hmm.
okay. But I don't remember. I don't remember associating that with the church. I've always been able
Mm-hmm.
to kind of separate it from, well, she's crazy, and I didn't understand the indoctrination that was making these comments. When people say it's not the
Yeah.
church, the people are good, it's, or the church is good, it's the people. It's like, where do we all understand now that this all comes from indoctrination.
Yep.
And that's like saying, well, the Nazis weren't bad. It was, it's like, well, they followed the rules. Okay, they followed
Yeah.
the rules and they followed the doctrine that they were taught. So that is, but that's my personality, and that's why I was so
Mm-hmm.
easily able to separate, where you internalize this as, this is me. I'm bad. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm doing bad things. I'm not following the rules. And that
Mm-hmm.
I just find that amazing and scary. I find that scary
Yeah.
because there are so many wonderful, vulnerable, as we talked about, people who just want to be kind and good, and they're constantly being told you're not good enough. That's how they
Yeah.
internalize it.
Yep.
So give me the timeline, because I can't remember. Give me the timeline. You graduated from high school, you went
Mm-hmm.
to BYU, Idaho, and then at what point did you decide, well, I'm going to go on a mission because I feel like I need to? So tell me, give me that
Yeah.
timeline.
Yeah. So it was about I want to say my third year, maybe at BYU, Idaho.
Oh, well, you
And
stuck
funny
with it a
enough,
long time.
yeah, I came home early the first year. There was some stuff, but it was, that. So,
Yeah.
anyways, funny enough, it was the same guy with the Tankini story who we were dating at the time, and he was just like, I don't think I want to date you unless you've gone on a mission. And I was just like, and this was kind of after the age change had happened too.
Yeah.
And I had
Right.
never considered going on a mission. It was just
Right.
not, that was not for me. But he said that, and again, I was like super angry about it, and I was like, well, I don't want to be with you anyways. And then I started to think about it a lot, and not just to date him, but I was like, I felt really guilty because again, I was like, Jesus did all this stuff for me, and I can't even give like a year and a half of my life to go on a mission. And I started to just be like, I am so ungrateful and I'm the worst. And so it was just mostly like a guilt thing. And then I also just felt like I could help people if I was to go out there. So it was it was mostly that was what made the decision. And so I was just kind of like, all right, this is what we're going to do. And it all happened really, really fast. I mean, I put in my papers so quickly. Even the call that I got, and we to this day, I still don't know what got messed up, but the call to like show up to the MTC was mid semester for me. It would have been mid
Oh,
semester. So I had to like leave early that semester as well. And I don't know what happened with that because I definitely put in all the right dates and stuff. So it all just getting endowed and all that happened like within a couple of months. It was a
wow.
whirlwind. But the process to the interviews to get your mission call, you know, that was pretty awful because I loved my bishop in Rexburg, Idaho. Actually, I think he was the sweetest. But our stake president was known for being intense, and I had, you know, had friends that had experiences with him, but I kind of was like, I'll be fine. And then I go in there, and I didn't realize that so many stake presidents make you reconfess everything that you've already been forgiven of to pass that meeting. And I kept telling him that I didn't have anything to tell him because I was like, I've been forgiven of this stuff. And he kept saying, are you sure? Are you sure? And he kept asking me, are you
Yeah.
sure you feel like you can go on a mission? Like, are you sure? And it made me just think, like, is there something he knows that I don't? Like, I'm not able to do this. And I just felt all these kinds of ways about it. And so afterwards, I remember just like crying so hard and going home to my apartment, and all my roommates and their boyfriends and whoever was there was like, I don't think that's normal. But I was like, it must be because he's a stake president. But I had such a bad experience with that. So I was like, okay, got through it. And then once the papers were done, I was like, great. And then I was really hoping to speak a language or go foreign. And I got called to Arcadia, California, which is very close to where some of my extended family lives. So I was
Oh,
like
God.
kind of bummed about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not Boise, Idaho, and no offense to anyone that lives in Boise. I
Yeah.
think Boise's great, but you know,
Yeah.
you want to go somewhere cool.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, all right, it is what it is. And I just had to kind of put on the I'm still excited face. And at the end of the day, I still was because I wanted to do the right thing. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of anxiety about it until I was out in the field, weirdly enough. Like I was super excited until then. So
Wow. Okay, let me ask a question. Did the stake president's last name begin with an S or an M?
I'm honestly trying to remember, but one of my friends would know and I'll have to ask her. But
Okay.
I'm
'Cause-
pretty sure it's an S.
Okay. Because I'm trying to remember when the new, and I think it's when the state got separated that we got a new stake president. And this stake president that was when we left Vancouver and moved to Arizona. This stake president was kind of, you know, Vancouver's a small town. So there's a little bit of dynasty that lives there, you know, people that are big fish in a little pond. And so there was a little bit of a dynasty thing going on. And I'll never forget, I'm sitting in sacrament meeting, and you'll remember, you know, I always have TJ on my left because that's where the wheelchair
Mm-hmm.
space is for on the pews, right? So I've got my grandson to my right, I've got TJ to my left. So in order for me to escape, I have to climb over his wheelchair, right? And so this
Yep.
guy comes to the ward and starts talking, and he starts over the pulpit just blasting women. When you're on vacation and you wear inappropriate clothing, or you wear a bikini and you post it on Facebook, what is the message that you are sending out to? And this is in Sacrament. And I remember going, oh yeah, I'm not listening to this. And I'm trying to climb over TJ and get out of there and wheel him out without being very obvious, you know. And I'm looking around at all of the wonderful women that I know that probably wear a bikini on vacation, and they are the most
Mm-hmm.
temple worthy, Christian, Jesus loving people that you could ever find on this earth. And for him, and
Mhm.
then, and I'm just gonna, I mean, I'm not saying who he was, but then because I'm out in the hallway with TJ, I'm watching him come out, and he was going to go in and speak with a bunch of maybe the deacon's quorum or teacher's quorum. He was waiting for Sunday
Mm.
school to get out so that he could then go into the classroom and talk with the priesthood boys. And so I'm just standing there watching him, and I'm watching him as the women would walk by, and he would totally do one of these, just check them up and
Ugh.
down. And I was like, oh, see, that explain. You have a
Yeah.
problem, and
Yeah.
you're going to
Yeah.
call us out on that. I mean, that was just,
Yes.
but again, I never put that and the church. It was always like, you're a pervert or you're a weirdo. I
Mm.
never thought, oh, because this is the doctrine that you were taught, you know? Okay, so I'm
Right.
curious. So this boyfriend that sent you on a mission, did he get married while you were on your mission? I mean, what was like, he had
So,
this little check mark of, well, she's got to have blonde hair, check, check. She's got to be gorgeous,
right.
check, check. A little uncomfortable with the tankini. I would prefer a burqa, but whatever. And then a
Mhm.
mission. So what did he do while you were gone?
So the things that ended up for him even crazier than you could expect. He dated this other girl for a while and had the same experience. Told her the same thing. Like, well, they actually got engaged, and their wedding was like three. It was like 2 or 3 days before the wedding, and he broke it off with her because he said the same thing. Like, he thinks she should serve a mission. They had the wedding like set up and everything, and she went on a mission, came back, and they're married now, and they have kids.
Oh, they are. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yep.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I want a
So,
secret investigation into that one. So
oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I can send you
you
down that rabbit hole.
yeah, you dodged a bullet there, girlfriend.
Yes.
So,
Oh my
okay.
gosh, yes.
So you're on a mission. You're like, I can do this. This is great. I can do this. And then what happened?
So I wasn't out there very long, and I started having just extreme panic attacks,
Mm.
just like debilitating panic attacks, like multiple times a day. I'm trying to teach a lesson, I'm trying to talk to people on the street, whatever it was, and I could not focus because it was so bad. And when you're at home and you have anxiety, there's things you can do. You can listen to music, you can go for a walk, you can watch a show, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can call your family. And so I'm out there, and it just dawned on me pretty quickly that this is not going to get better. I'd had blessings for it. I had been praying. I'd been doing all the right things, and it just was not improving. And I was like, I'm not going to be an effective missionary if I'm doing this all the time. So, very unlike me, where usually I would just push through something and just be like, too bad. In my head, I was like, you know what? I think I need to go home, like pretty much immediately. And when I talked to my mission president, I do hear a lot of horror stories with mission presidents. And
All right.
I think being a woman, mine probably was different. I think if I was a male in this situation, they would have pushed back a little bit harder. But my mission president just basically said, if you had cancer and you were having, thing like physical symptoms of cancer, you wouldn't be beating yourself up for having that. So having anxiety, it's a brain thing. You can't control that either. So like, you should not be so hard on yourself that you cannot do this. Like, it's not your fault, basically. And I would say that was one of my very few very positive experiences with someone in the church, like post college, because
Yeah.
that made me feel a lot better. And I will say, when I came home, it was really awful. I mean, I felt shame, obviously, because I couldn't do it, and it was so quick. And there were people in our ward that, were like, "What are you doing here? And why are you here?" And
Yeah.
assuming things and whatever.
Oh,
Um, and I know that, when I got home, my mom was just so nice about it. I'm so glad you're here, was so
yeah.
happy. And I think my dad had a bit harder time with it at first because he just didn't really understand that anxiety at the time. But very quickly he got it, and he was supportive and stuff. But I think I really quickly was like, you know what, this is an opportunity to help people with anxiety, because I know I'm not the only person here.
Right.
And so I think I actually got up, and whether it was a talk or bore my testimony about being able to be helpful with anxiety, and that felt like a good turning point as well. Like, it kind of gave me like more juice for a while to be positive in the church and find my own way within that, because so many people came up to me after or days later or messaged me that were like, I'm struggling with this too, and I don't know what to do
Oh,
with it. And I realized, oh, and it was, primarily women, right? And so I'm like, man, this is a thing. So I felt like I had purpose um, after coming back from my mission because I was like, all right, this is my mission. Like it's to help comfort people with anxiety. And I think being empathetic is ultimately the thing that leads you out, right? So I think that
yeah.
was like the start of the end essentially, but in like a way that you can't see when you're in the middle of it.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that you just said that being able to help other people and understanding that you're not doing this alone and having that empathy
Mm-hmm.
might be the beginning of you recognizing, wait, something's off here. I love that you
Yeah.
just kind of explained that. There's another book that I read, and I can't remember what it is right now, but she definitely was talking in this book about how most religions are made for extroverts. They're not made for
Mm-hmm.
introverts. And I
Totally.
can't, and I know I'm the kind of personality. Here I am. I have a podcast. I'm also all alone in my room, right? And so I come across as more of an extrovert, but really I'm kind of an introvert. And the
Mm-hmm.
idea of having to live with someone that I don't know, and then having that person change out every 6 months or however soon they do a companion change, moving to
Yep.
a new community, moving into now, I don't mind moving into different wards as a family, but as a young missionary where you're expected to go to dinner at other people's homes, eat their food. I
Mm-hmm.
would have done the exact same thing. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And so
Yes.
I admire you so much for recognizing that this isn't good for me. I have to handle this. You recognize your anxiety and you recognize that self-care is what you
Mm-hmm.
needed to do. That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. That's what I'm talking
Thank
about when I'm
you.
talking about your pure self-compassion that you have that is just kind of
Well,
you recognize this and you're like, I need to help me right now. So
well, thank
that's
you. Yeah, no,
amazing.
it's funny looking back, right? Again, you don't have the words for what you're experiencing at the time, but I look
Right.
back on my mission and all of those things are true. Like you're doing all these things because I consider myself the same. I think I'm mostly an introvert, but I seem like an extrovert because I'm on TikTok. I'm always doing these things. And so I think
Right.
I come across the same as you.
Yeah.
But yeah, being put in all these situations that are so uncertain all the time, and you're taught that God is going to impress upon you the things that you need to say and do, and He doesn't. That those things don't
Right.
happen, so you're always kind of blank, and you're like, "What am I doing wrong?" And also, I think you just meet so many lovely, wonderful people out there, and it feels wrong to tell them as a child, like a 20-year-old, an adult. Here's what you need to
Right.
do with your life when you have so
Yeah.
little experience. But also, you meet these lovely, wonderful people who it just doesn't feel right to push them into something that they don't need. Like they're doing fine. They're happy, they're doing service, they're lovely people, or they might be mentally unstable and then you don't feel right pushing them into this thing either because you're like they need serious help. And so
Right.
I just think that I was experiencing these things without knowing how to verbalize that like this is not right. So yes, all these things created so much stress and anxiety, but coming out of it was a healthy choice.
I'm so glad that you did that. So that's when you decided, well, I'm going to try Utah instead of
Yes.
Idaho. So you
Yep.
went
Yep.
to BYU Provo from there. Is that correct?
So actually, no, I didn't even finish my degree at BYU Idaho. I had a fashion blog at the time, which for that
Oh, that's
era was
right.
like a big deal,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
no one was doing it really in Rexburg at the time. So I was kind of the person, which was super surreal. And so Utah was just like the mecca for
Oh,
bloggers and fashion, the whole
yes.
thing.
Yeah.
And so I had friends out there, and it was just like, I'm tired of Rexburg, Idaho. This seems like just the next thing to do. And I was like, all right, I just up and decided to go there. And I was planning on initially continuing education actually at UVU at one point, but I just started
Yeah.
working and nannying so fast that I didn't quite ever do it. And now I'm in a great
Yeah.
place, so it's totally
Yeah.
fine. But yeah, I was
Yeah.
just out there working and blogging pretty much.
So talk about your modesty blog because I remember following
Mhm.
you and I just remember thinking this girl is amazing. And first of all, she's gorgeous, so she probably could put on a paper bag and go, "Isn't this cute?" We've all be going, "Yeah, I love it," you know. But
Sweet
so
of you.
talk about that because you did really well. That was a very
Thanks.
successful thing for you. So talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was great. It kind of, honestly, I just stumbled into it. I don't even remember like starting the blog, but I do remember just having the thought of like, oh, eventually I'm going to have to wear garments. And I knew I wasn't going to like that. And so I was like, again, how can I help other people not feel like, oh, they're alone and hate this thing? Because for me, it was like, I'm going to spend all my time hating this thing, like focusing on that instead of the thing I'm supposed to be doing, like my covenants and all this. So I was like,
Yeah.
I got to find a way to make it cute because I just never really aligned with, and I'm sure you can relate to this, like traditional Mormon fashion. It was just not for me. So I was just, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Fashion blogs were kind of taking off. So I took my own spin on it. And, I was doing an outfit, maybe a couple outfits a week. And it was a combination of thrifting and like new stuff. And I got to a point where I was getting featured a lot and people were sending me stuff and I was doing a lot of collaborations. So it was really fun. It really was. But funny enough, when I got to Utah was where it kind of took a turn as well because I, started to meet all these girls who were doing it that I'd followed and realized it was just like not what I thought it was. Like these people
Oh,
were not the kind, and there were a lot of great ones, but there were a lot of
right.
people that were just not the people I thought. And they were kind of just like selling out and doing it for different reasons than I. And so it kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. And also because I lost myself a little in it. Like once I got out there, I felt like I had to have a certain Utah blogger look to gain traction. And so I was dressing in ways and doing collaborations with people that I probably wouldn't have naturally, but I wanted to grow and I wanted to, be a
Yeah.
big blogger. And so it was really an interesting learning experience because as I grew out of that and got back into the styles that I would actually choose and I would want, I did much better with those.
Right.
But it was really fun, honestly. It was super surreal to have people recognizing me like in the grocery store and stuff in Utah early on when I was there. Cause again, I'm kind of an extrovert or an introvert. And when people meet me, I feel like not as cool as they're making me out to be. So I just feel kind of like embarrassed. And I'm sure they were
Yeah.
like, this girl's so weird. But anyways,
So you have a
it was
huge
quite,
imposter complex. It's like,
yes.
I'm not a blogger, really. It's a fake,
Yeah.
yeah, totally downgrading
Yes.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so it was a whole thing, but I had a lot of fun doing it. But when I left the church was definitely when it kind of like stopped because there was such fallout from people who followed me and were super upset about the changes. So
That's so
yeah.
see, if you could have just stuck it out to where when Target started carrying their Pioneer clothing a couple years ago,
Oh,
if you just could have stuck it out to the Pioneer
would have
era,
been great.
yeah, it just was built right there. It was for all the Mormons in the world. It's like Target did a survey and said, can we find a demographic that will wear Pioneer clothing? And then they, put it into their stores. And I mean, I love
Yes.
Target, but for the last 2 years, I just kind of
Oh,
walk through and go, what is happening? Have you watched the
same.
Banner of Heaven? Do you not see the similarity between clothing here? You know, and
Spot on.
also
Yes.
the Lularoo. I remember when Lularoo came in, I
Oh.
didn't even know what this was, but I remember sitting in church going,
Mm-hmm.
why do all these people have the same dress on? Where are they getting I didn't see that at Costco. Because hey,
Yeah.
I buy a thing at Costco now and then. But I was like,
Uh-huh.
do they sell that at Costco? It's the same dress, but it has a different pattern. But it was garment,
Yeah.
approved. And so it was
Oh,
like, oh my gosh, people. So blogs like yours was so needed. It's like, can we get out
yeah.
of those stores? And guess what? You can
Yes.
find something at Nordstrom's or
Yeah.
go behind the Target Pioneer clothes and then you'll find a
Yeah.
skirt or something. Yeah. So yeah, interesting. So when did you meet your first husband?
So I met him about like 4 or 5 months after I moved to Utah. And it was kind of interesting how it happened. Like I was with my friend, my best friend, the night before she was getting married. So we were like having a sleepover and we were just talking and I was on my Instagram and some guy had liked my picture and I was like, oh, he's kind of cute. So I went back and liked his picture and said, you're cute or something. And he replied, better in person. And I was like, okay. And he was a silly guy. And so we met like very shortly after that. And yeah, we dated, maybe 7 months or so before we got engaged. So like longer than the traditional,
Yeah,
but still not super long. But
right.
yeah, and to this day, I still think the world of my first husband. He was a great person. Like it was
Uh,
just, we were too young, and
yeah.
I still, feel sad about it sometimes because I'm like, man, maybe if I had met you later in my life, things could have been different. But it was just we were so young, and I knew there were so many experiences that I had yet to have on my own because my worth had always been tied to a man in some way. Like you literally start your life. You get your blessings from males, and there's God, and there's all these male figures, and everything is tied to that. And I knew I just needed to have more experiences on my own, and it had very little to do, if nothing to do with him as a person. He was
Right.
great. I just felt like, we're friends, and I need to go do this thing. And yeah, it was just, and we left the church, pretty closely at the same time. Even he
Oh,
left a
oh,
little bit after I did. So it wasn't, you kind of think sometimes, oh, if we both leave the church, it'll fix all of our problems or whatever,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
in this case, I just knew, nope, it was just I just needed to go do my own thing.
Yeah. That's interesting. So while you were married, did you both start to go down the rabbit hole of truths that you were finding in the church together? And then you left
Mhm.
first and then separated and then he left, or what's the timeline on that one?
So I was the one who started. So right before we got married, two of my really good friends, Sam Shelley and Tanner Gilliland, they both left the church, and they were like the gold standard in my eyes of like Mormons, good Mormons. And when they left the church, it really shook me really close to before Jake and I got married, or my ex-husband and I got married. And it really put me down a rabbit hole again. And then I checked out the CES letter because they
Mm.
had read it and they recommended it. And that obviously sent me down a spiral. But I doubled down and was like, this is going to be fine. And so I was having all these questions right before we got married. So as we're getting sealed in the temple, I'm already kind of like, I don't know how to feel about this, but I've got to just like push forward.
Right.
And so pretty much the beginning of our marriage, I'm having all these questions, all these issues, but it was, this was 8, 9 years ago now. So like it was not like it is now where
No.
you have a lot of options of who you can talk to and where you can go. You have TikTok,
Right.
right? I
Right.
had one group chat with those people from college who had left, and that was all the people that I could talk to.
Right.
So I would talk to them, and I was super alone, but I didn't want to at the time tell my husband because I was like, well, he's gonna leave me and all these things. And his family he has tons of Mormon lineage. So they're just like,
Ah,
they were his parents when they got sealed, they did it with one of the general authorities or something, like they're
right,
apostles.
right,
So they
right.
were, crazy intense. And so I think there was just more on the line for him. So I was worried about looking like the girl that ruined their kid and all this stuff. So he basically like figured it out at some point because I wasn't telling him anything, and he had seen it on my phone at one point that I had said something, and somehow it just brought it up. And one night he just told me that he's feeling the same, and it was really nice to have those experiences together, to finally have someone to share that with, and just like helping him through it too as he left, because again his family was so into it
Ah,
that it was nice to be there for him too. So that was one of the positive things too. I mean, it's never positive leaving the church. It's hard. But yeah, that was kind of what it looked like, which was really interesting.
well, which I think brings up the point of diversity is you obviously have a critically thinking mind. You're able to look at things and go, huh, I'm going to find out more about that. That doesn't sit right with
Hmm.
me. Something's off
Yeah.
here. I'm okay if I find out that it's true or that there's
Hmm.
substance behind it, but I need to know that for myself. So the fact that you are a critical thinker is where you're able to go, this is not a good situation for me. It's not that I don't believe that, but I'm going to check this out more. And that's the
Hmm.
difference between an indoctrinated mind who doesn't have the ability or even the self-respect to go, this isn't working for me. This is tearing me apart, so
Yeah.
that's amazing. So when you told your family that, how long were you married before you guys separated?
A couple of years, so 2 years.
Okay. Okay, and did
Hmm.
you have all of the guilt that you would think of as like, oh, the reception, and I have that crock pot that the Joneses gave me, and feel guilty
Yes.
using it now. I mean, did you have all that
Mhm.
stupid stuff that
For
you're
sure.
like,
Yeah.
oh, I mean, there's people that stay married for that reason. It's like, oh, my parents
Yeah.
paid for this wedding, and I can't leave him
Hmm.
now. I mean that, which
Yeah.
is crazy,
Yeah,
but
but it is really hard, especially in my situation where I was like, nothing awful has happened. Like,
Yeah.
there wasn't like a cheating or like an abuse or anything of that kind. Like, you're
Yeah.
just like, oh, I'm leaving because it's just the right thing for me. And that feels so underwhelming. So you feel anxious to tell people that, especially because, he was very close with my family and they
Oh,
loved him and they all still
yeah.
love him. And so it's just
Yeah.
one of those things where you just feel sad. It was just a very sad, unfortunate experience that I did have a lot of disappointment, I guess, just with like the church in general, because I was like, I don't think him and I would have gotten married that soon if it wasn't this thing, right? Where you feel like you have to hurry and
Yes.
do it. Like, we could have dated for a long time and avoided this whole situation. And so
Yes.
it was just really complicated. But I did have that sadness and that guilt for sure of just like I failed, like I couldn't do this thing. But I also knew it was the right thing. So it kind of like helped even it out, even though it was really hard. It was really hard telling my
Right.
family, and they all, were really sad, but they supported me, which was really nice.
That's amazing. You see, I'm just telling you, people, she has an amazing family. So
Yeah.
I like in your Mormon story, you talked about how when you met your second husband, you thought you had an understanding that you both were not
Yeah.
100% on board with the church. And
Yeah.
so, and I could see where you would be like, look, I really like you. And now we're even on the same page. So we're going to start this marriage on the same page. But that kind
Mhm.
of didn't work out. So talk about that.
No, it was, yeah, the second marriage, very different than my first one for sure. Yeah, I met him when I was fully separated from the church. He knew that I was involved with, helping people outside of the church when we met. And when we met, he basically told me, yeah, like I don't want to get married in the temple. Like, I don't really see myself doing any of that stuff. Like, I don't really align with that stuff anymore. Great. So I was like, okay. And this guy was just very like love bombing in the beginning, right? Like, it was just like making me
Oh,
feel very special, and you're like my dream girl and all this stuff. And being someone who always had a really low self-esteem, I was just like, oh, this is so cool. And after a few months, I think it was, you're dating and you're really interested, and then it's like, actually, I think I want to start going to church again. And even then I was like, I don't really want to do that, but like, I will support you because, I care about you and I'll go with you occasionally, but it's not going to be easy for me. And
oh,
I did. And, it was so hard sitting through that. And I was amazed at how much, because this is out in Salem, Utah, that he was growing up. And that's a very intense area. And going out there to church where he was living at the time, I mean, I was amazed at how many talks were just dedicated about people who've left the church. And so you're just
oh,
sitting there like, how can you not like, this was so uncomfortable. So I go to the bathroom and cry and then come back, and then
oh
he would be like
gosh.
upset about my reactions. And so it was just this very odd thing. But because the relationship was super unhealthy, and that's a whole thing. But as that relationship progressed, it was just like it would change a little bit at a time. So it would be like, oh, I want to go to church now. Actually, I think I do want to get married in the temple now. Oh, actually, so it would just change really, really fast. And oh, I want to be sealed and all these things. And so for me, who I thought, oh, I'll never have an issue with the church again, I'm with this person who I'm very, codependent with, and my brain has this weird like pull to. I'm like, well, I got to do anything I can to stay with this person. And I think his relationship definitely mimicked a lot of how the church feels, which was a very unique thing. But it felt like, I had to be good enough. Like, I had to prove to him that I was worthy of love. And that meant like forgetting what I needed and doing what he wanted. And
Oh,
so I, in my head,
100%.
just kind of like justified it. And I was like, well, I can go back and just help the people who are struggling, because I know those people are struggling and someone needs to help them, and I'll be that person. So I kind of convinced myself that that's what I could do. And obviously, that doesn't work for very long. But I even found myself willing to get married in the temple again, to get
Oh
married
my
to him, because there was
gosh.
so much pressure from his family and just him in general. And I was just like, my brain was just in preservation mode, right? So I was like, okay, whatever it is, whatever it is. And not luckily, but COVID happened right around that time. So all the temples were closed, so we couldn't get married in the temple. So we ended up being able to get married and not have that experience. But
Yeah.
that didn't change his expectation of wanting it to be me to be a good Mormon girl and do these things. So it was really, really brutal.
And that's amazing. I mean, listening to that, when they talk about that male toxicity, is harmful to the men, as well as, patriarchy is harmful to men as much as it is women. That's a perfect
Mhm.
example where he didn't even know who
Yeah.
he was. He
Mhm.
is a white male that has been taught, from the time that he was 12 years old, that he is a son of God and that he will
Yeah.
have his own planet someday and will rule nations. And he's looking at this like, if I give this church up, where's my nation? Where's my world?
For
And
sure.
then there's a script that they're taught, and then you will have a wife whose sole purpose is to support you in whatever it is you decide you want to do. And even if you change your
Exactly.
mind in 5 years, you can give that up and go do something else, and your wife will go, "Sure, I don't
Yep.
mind packing up the house, our 7 kids, and moving them to Oklahoma, no problem."
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's what they expect. So he didn't even know who he was. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that, like you say, going to church, I mean, there's going to be like, she's not a member. She's not active. What do you think about it? I don't know,
Oh, yeah.
And so he's got
Yes.
to overcome that. So you almost have sympathy for this poor guy who's also playing a role that
Mhm.
benefits him. There's nothing bad about this white male privilege priesthood. There's nothing bad about that for men. I'm sorry. I know I've
Yes.
heard other
Yeah.
people say, well, they're pressured to, provide for their family, and they have to bring in all this income because their wife is going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I'm like, I get that, but I don't know a lot of men who, when they're told, look, somebody's going to wash your clothes, cook your food, take care of your children, you
Yes.
go do you. Whatever you
Yeah.
need to do, you go do you. I don't know a lot of people that aren't like, hey, I would like a wife. Thank you very much. Amy Poehler,
Exactly. Yes.
before I do it all, I have a wife, you know. So it's I have a hard time like falling down that, but
Mhm.
I know that it exists, and I know that there's truth in it. But again, you are just being pulled, the schizophrenic, who I need to be, and then you're
Yeah.
also indoctrinated, right? Well, I have to
Mhm.
support my husband. Well, my only purpose in life is to be a wife and a mother, and maybe I'm just not accepting that, and I don't know, maybe I should.
Yes.
So I mean, so now you're how old? What,
About to be
27?
30.
Yeah.
29 right
And
now. Oh, at the time, yeah,
at the
27.
time, yeah, 27, and so you're like, okay, again, when am I going to learn that, I have to do me, and I'd love to
Mhm.
find a partner that would love to do us together.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
but this has got to be a hard decision now because you're going on, you're 27, you're going on number 2. So how did that,
Mhm.
tell me how that went. You're like, hey, mom, dad,
Yeah, no, I mean, this was a very interesting situation because, again, this marriage was so different than my first marriage, and this marriage, my second marriage, was just so extremely unhealthy, but I was doing all this work all the time to convince everyone around me that he was this great guy and that everything was great and I'm happy and whatever it was. And I think that a lot of people around me could sense that something was off, but they were like, "We trust Chandler and we're going to let her do this thing." Um, so I just got to my breaking point within this relationship because it was just a very, very dark, unhealthy relationship. And like you said, he didn't know who he was, and he was very, very insecure and very, very narcissistic. And that was very unhealthy for me as a person who's always willing to give 110% of myself at the expense of myself. And he was willing to
exactly
take all of that. And
right.
I agree with your point 100%. Mormonism, even though he was not following any of the rules, he was doing all the things that you're not supposed to do. I think Mormonism was a place that he enjoyed because the world revolves around you. When you're a Mormon man, you're a white Mormon man, and women are second to you and they have to do what you say. So I think he found so much happiness in that idea. And I was
Right.
not what that was. He thought I could be, and then it wasn't.
Right.
So it all kind of fell apart when I realized for the first time in my life, do I want to have kids? I'd never asked myself this question, and I'd
Oh,
always just, assumed because when you're growing up an LDS kid, especially, and even outside of, religion, I just think it's always assumed. There's no ask, there's no question. Are you going to have kids?
right.
From like baby age, they're like, you're going to be a mom, and so you
Right.
never ask yourself. And I think that is a lot of roles that play in the church. But so I'm 27 or whatever, 28, it's 27, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I don't know if I want to have kids. Like I don't know if I have like the mental capacity for it. I've never connected with the idea of being pregnant and again, I have OCD and I'm kind of a hypochondriac. So anything that goes wrong with my body, it just gives me so much anxiety. And I'm like, I just don't know. Like I have my nieces and I get to be so involved in their life. And I was like, I think
Right.
that might be enough for me.
Yeah.
And so when I thought about it enough, I was like, all right, I'm going to tell this to my current husband at the time. It did not go over well, as you can imagine. Like he
That's not
was,
on my list. What are you talking
yeah,
about?
yeah. And it was so much more like, I just don't know. Like, I was like, I don't know if I've ever asked myself, and here's where I am. And to him, that was just like, not okay. So he was very upset about that. Very, very, very upset about that. And, very shortly after that, I was just like, there was some stuff going on. I was like, this is not healthy. I am deteriorating. I am losing myself. I need to get out of this. And so when I started to tell my close friends and my family what was really going on in the relationship, everyone was pretty positive, supporting of me getting out of that. And
Excellent.
I haven't, gotten into all the details with my parents necessarily, like specifics, because it's some of it's pretty dark, and it's like you don't want to get into that with people who love you because that's just painful. But
Yeah.
even the stuff I did tell them, everyone's been very much okay with it. And so even knowing that, yep, it's the right thing to do, this is not healthy. And like, I've never once been sad, missed him, or regretted it since. It is hard getting over that mental stumbling block of this is my second marriage. And I'm only, at the time I was 27, 28. That felt just really embarrassing. And now I
Right.
understand that it's just silly. It's like marriage, whatever. It's
Yeah.
all made up
Yeah.
when you really think about everything. And it's like if the right person doesn't care. But it was hard to give it up again when I'm like, oh, I'm so close. Like I have a house with this person and I have this little life, and it's just not the right person. And that was really painful to deal with. Yeah, it was rough. But I'm
Yeah.
really glad that again my family was super supportive and my friends were also.
Well, and like you say, socially and culturally, this idea that you met someone and that you should get married versus I think that we're just going to hang out together or maybe even live
Hmm.
together for a year. And then you'd be able to recognize the narcissism. You'd be, recognize the love bombing. You'd recognize these personality traits that were dangerous. And you
Hmm.
don't get, I mean, how many times have I heard podcasts and talks about dating is your best self. Everybody puts on their best self when
Yep.
you're dating, and it's not the real you. Nobody knows the real you until after you've gotten married and there's a commitment and you've lived with somebody for a while. And so,
Hmm.
but this culture that is not in the world any longer, but it's still inside this religion that you get married first and then you figure out who this person is. Or, when I was growing
Yeah.
up, the mentality was you can get along with anybody as long as you're both, thinking the same way. And so,
Yes.
I mean, even a lot of my friends, I look at even then, I looked at their marriage and said, "Wow, he's a jerk. He's abusive." And but in our culture, in our era, you just put up
Hmm.
with it because you were told just to put up with it. And oh, they're, the same reason why I met I mean, like I said, I've never been anyone to put the dots together, but I just remember telling my husband, when we were younger, it's like, please explain to me how this guy that's been gone all day at work gets to come home, throw dinner down his throat, and then go over to the church and play basketball all night because he's so stressed out. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how come he's not helping put the kids to bed? How come he
Yeah.
doesn't have to help out with the dishes? But that's the
Uh-huh.
mentality and the social structure that the church and other fundamental, religions teach these women is that
Hmm.
you have two jobs. There's never a downtime for mothers or stay-at-home moms, and even,
Yeah.
women that are trying to pull down some kind of a career and be a mom. And then oftentimes, like you say, women who are trying to pull down a career, they become even more engrossed in, well, now I have to show I'm a great mom and a great
Yeah.
housekeeper and also CEO. And so they double
Yes.
down on their mom stuff, and it's just insane. And the guys are just like,
Hmm.
hey, rah, 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 see you later, got a basketball thing over at the church. And I'm like, does anybody else see that this is not right,
Yeah. Yes.
so culturally, if, like you said, you've already gone through one marriage, if you would not have been inside that culture, you would have said, you know what, we're just going to live together for a couple of years and I'm going to figure you
Hmm.
out, and we're going to save ourselves a lot of time and money. And, but it's that culture that, and I don't know. Anyway, so that's the sad
Yeah.
part. So now, okay, so now you're going to be 30. You
Yes.
old lady, you. So what are you
I
doing?
know.
Tell me about your great life now what are you doing?
Honestly, it's been a little bit all over the place since then. I mean, it took me, after getting the divorce, I was just having a good time and just enjoying taking things day by day for quite a while. And that was really nice. And honestly, and spending more time with my friends and family that I was unable to for a while. And then weirdly enough, I'm thinking I'm stable, I'm good. And then about a year after, I was like, I think just all the feelings and like all of the emotions and like all the pain just like hit me so hard. I don't know what it was, but it was like I had just not processed everything fully.
Mhm.
Because even when I met my second husband, like I had been partially through processing my church experience. So that just
Right.
retangled everything back up. And so once that all kind of hit me, I was like, I need to officially deal with this stuff because it's not going to go away.
Right.
So I think the last year or so, it's just been really heavy into getting into therapy and getting into trying things like new things all the time again. So taking a lot of classes, whether it's like pottery classes or like Pilates classes or an oil painting classes, like just trying to find myself again, I guess, like find myself creatively again, because I feel like I was always a very creative person and just all the things that I experienced just kind of like pushed it all down because I
Right.
was always prioritizing everyone's needs that like I kind of lost myself. So I think it's just been like finding the things that I love again and trying to like meet people in the process while doing those things, and having connections with people that are not religiously based because you have that built-in community when you go
Yeah.
places when you're LDS, which is so nice. But now it's like, okay, here's how I can do that as an adult and make friends. And it's been great. I got into, rock climbing several months ago and make so many friends doing that. And so I think it's just been just enjoying life again, like figuring
Right.
out who I am and just having as many experiences as I can. And I think something that I've enjoyed too is just I used to be such like a little which, surprising maybe, but I was always just like so scared of everything. Like I never liked to do
Mm.
roller coasters and I never liked to like try new things. Like it just freaked me out because I was so anxious about how it was going to go. And now I just like pushing myself and trying things that I've never done, that I might have been scared to do previously and realizing that I'm okay. And I think it's been mentally just really healthy to continue to grow that way. So it's just been having lots of new experiences and spending time with people I love and also enjoying the relationships with so many friends and family members who now are also outside of the church and just like meeting them as who they really are. It's just been really
Right.
enjoyable.
Right. And that's interesting. How are your relationships with your high school people?
Mm.
They have they accepted your journey, or have you had to kind of cut some
Yeah.
relationships off?
Surprisingly, I would say one of my best friends from high school who I fully expected to go the worst once I left. One of her family members was actually in one of the ex-member groups that I was in early on and outed me to this friend. And I was so embarrassed because I thought she was for sure going to be like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And she
Yeah.
actually handled it really, really well. And this friend and I, we still talk, like occasionally we text, we still send each other different things. And surprisingly, she follows me on TikTok, which I was like, like she's really into the church still, but okay. So I would say she's been honestly pretty cool about it. The family she comes from, I don't know how they feel about it, but I know that she's been pretty surprisingly good. But I would say most of the people from high school and then from the ward is pretty split. Some
Mm.
people no longer talk to. They told me how they felt when they knew that I left, when I posted that I left, and I've never heard from them again. There were some there were some old young women leaders that I had that reached out when they found out that I left and were pitching it that they wanted to be supportive, but they wanted to know why I left because there was speculation and there was just a lot of weird discussion with people who I thought I really loved and respected that apparently did not like the decision. So it's been really split. But I think the people who've meant the most to me have stuck around. And I remember when my absolute best friend that I met in college, her name's Catherine. When I finally told her, and I was terrified to tell her because she's truly just like my best friend. And when I finally told her, she said, well, if you're not in the celestial kingdom, I don't want to go there. And I was just like, and so that was so meaningful for me. And she's since has also left the church, and our relationship is just like so much better now even. And again, several family members. So it's just really great getting to, I don't know, learn who people are outside of all of that, because everyone just
Yeah.
continues to be so amazing, and I'm honestly happier. So it's really nice.
Yeah. It's amazing that the beautiful young women that I had in my beehive and my maid class, they have all grown up to be such diversified women.
Hmm.
And it's been so fun just watching them choose. They're the generation that somehow found the ability to go, oh, yeah, I'm going to do me and
Yes.
I'm going to live my best life. And I love that so
Yep.
much about those girls. And I did find that the people in the wards that we lived in when we lived in Vancouver have been so, most of them, so warm and accepting and loving.
Yes.
The friends that I had for, 20 something years when we lived in Oregon dropped me like a hot potato. And which I think is so funny because we were best friends. So I know all their secrets. And so
Uh,
it's kind of
isn't
like,
that the best?
yeah, it's like you just keep that facade going there, sister, if
Hmm.
that helps you,
Hmm.
So it's
Yes.
it's it's no big deal, but it's
Yeah.
well, you're absolutely amazing. And I want to finish up by reading this quote from Brene Brown, my prophetess. Vulnerability is not about winning, it's not about losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. And I feel like
Mm.
that's exactly what you've done. You showed up, you didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but you just knew that I can't live this way, and I'm going to live my life and be the best Chandler that I can be. And I just absolutely love that. And I have so much respect for you. So next time we drag
Oh.
your parents down to Arizona, you're going to have to come with them.
Yes, yes. I
So,
actually think that we're planning on coming for Thanksgiving, so we'll be out
ah,
there.
that would be
Yeah,
amazing. You
we'll make it
guys, you
happen.
have to, yeah, you have to know her mother. Her mother is the kindest soul ever. And when we were in the same ward, she would often come up to me. She'd grab my son, who was in a wheelchair, severely disabled, and should say, "Go, you go to Relief Society. I'm going to take him."
Hmm.
And she was a lifesaver for me. She was just an angel, and that's the way their whole family is. So I'm not going to get into
That's great.
golf because we don't do golf, and that's my husband and her father. They do that golf thing, and
Yep.
we love it. So anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much for
uh,
joining me today, and all the
yes.
best for you.
Thank
I
you
look
so
forward to
much.
watching the
Appreciate it.
rest of your life.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. You
Bye
too.
bye. Oh, there you go, right? I mean, what else can you say? To be almost 30 years old, but to understand who she is and to understand even the psychological concepts, like she recognized the love bombing, she recognized the narcissism, she recognized her inability to be able to be someone else so that this other person could be fulfill this facade that they had outlined or scripted for their life. I just think that's amazing, and I see Chandler as an example for other women to be able to stand up, to be able to do hard things, which I think having two marriages in a fundamental religion, to leave a mission, I think those are hard things. But she recognized that in order for her to survive, this is what she had to do. It wasn't all about the system, and she was bucking the system and doing what she needed to do for her healthy self. So thank you, Chandler, for joining us today, and I hope all of you enjoyed our interview. We have some fabulous interviews coming up. I've met the most amazing women in the last couple of weeks, and we've got them all lined up to be our future guests. So if you love She Became Visible, please like and subscribe. Please donate. You can donate on the shebecamevisible.org. The money goes directly into Mormon Discussions. It does not go to me. It is a nonprofit organization that allows other podcasters to do what they do and to help their fellow people deconstruct or learn in any way that they can. So you can find your ability to donate on shebecamevisible.org. And please be willing to donate $2, $3, $4, $5 a month. It doesn't matter, but I know that Mormon Discussions would really appreciate that. But definitely like and subscribe. I also wanted to let you know that we are in the process of switching over my YouTube from the Go Gray Dame site into She Became Visible site. So we will be in the process of doing it, and I will tell you more about that because we don't want to lose our subscribers. We want you to move over to the She Became Visible. I actually have two formats, and one of them is my Go Gray Dame, which is really more of a supportive program for women who are choosing to, again, be themselves, to become visible, let their hair go gray, do whatever they need to do to age gracefully. So I interview a lot of women that are focusing more on the aging process. And my She Became Visible is more on the deconstruction process. So we're going to try and separate those two. So I'll give you more information about that. In the meantime, have a great week, and we will see you next Sunday at 11 a.m. Bye-bye.